It's 2019, the absolute golden era of some of the best smartphones ever produced. We're seeing super fast fingerprint scanners, ultra-wide cameras, thinner bezels, and in all of this, Google decides to drop what can only be described as a counterculture smartphone in the Pixel 4 and the 4 XL. This is one of the strangest flagship phones to come out of a mainstream manufacturer, and one of its biggest features would be made redundant due to one small worldwide disaster. What a ride. The Pixel 4 XL was a considerable jump from its predecessor. It ditched the ultra-wide selfie camera, the capacitive fingerprint reader, the sleek body with two-tone rear paneling, and this all came in a phone that Google was asking $899 for on the low end for the XL. By the way, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, that would be fantastic. The Pixel 4's headline feature was its radar-based sensor array sat atop in that massive forehead, dubbed Project Soli. Not only could it sense movement, and so built-in gesture navigation and recognition was pretty hit or miss, but it forewent sporting a physical fingerprint reader for facial recognition, much like what Apple was doing at the time with its iPhones, which worked pretty well. It was far more secure than the photo-based 2D facial recognition setups that you'd find on its competing smartphones, but then something happened in the world that would, well, sort of put a damper on the whole thing. About 6 months after the 4's release, the World Health Organization officially recognized COVID-19 as a pandemic. And among the real-life horrors that many experienced in this time, we were also forced to wear face masks, which made it pretty difficult to use any kind of face unlock system, even one as sophisticated as you'd find on the Pixel 4 XL. This meant that those of us who used one of these back in the day would have to, when out and about and forced to use a face mask, have to input our PIN instead of just, well, more conveniently using a fingerprint. And so many of us just wished Google had left the scanner somewhere on the phone in some regard. But this wasn't the only counterculture thing about the Pixel 4 XL, it goes further. At a time when LG had really popularised the ultra-wide camera on the back of your phone, and I mean by this point even Apple had started including it with its iPhone 11 series, Google decided, no, we don't need that, and instead of an ultra-wide, included a 2x telephoto lens instead. It wasn't a bad telephoto by 2019 standards, though by this point Huawei had already started making those big periscope things on its P series devices, with the 5x optical periscope in the P30 Pro in particular. But Google's decision for the 4 XL and the 4 to include medium-long lenses and not an ultra-wide felt like the company simply just wasn't reading the room, especially given that the telephoto sensor included here was comparatively minute and quite weak compared to the main, and also heavily lent on the company's super res zoom tech, which you'd think would have been better off just using the main camera and cropping in. Of course, we would eventually be generously given the ultra-wide with its successor, but the 4 and the 4 XL's camera, whilst undeniably superb in quality, lacked the versatility that LG, Huawei, Samsung, and embarrassingly, Apple of all companies had been providing in their full fat models. Though saying that, this phone still takes some phenomenal photos today. I know the hardware on offer here was never the most impressive, even back when it was brand new, with Chinese smartphones even back then being a lot more powerful. Some things never change, I guess, but the small sensor and outdated processing still puts out really sharp, colourful and accurate photos. I did a video on Android Police not long ago where I compared the Pixel 3a versus the Pixel 9 in photos, and in one times they were crazy similar, and it just goes to show that Google's camera chops really do hold up over time. Sure, on paper you'll find better hardware and even mid-rangers these days, but specs aside you can still get fantastic photos out of the Pixel 4 XL. But now we have to talk about the design. Let me know what you think of this particular one in the comments. I think it's aged pretty well actually. I mean, the blank slab with the flat front and rear panels isn't a million miles off what you find on even a Pixel 9 with our flat sides today. And this Panda or Stormtrooper unit, graciously provided by my good friend Damien Wild by the way, looks really sharp still with the characterful accented power button, hard contrast and minimalist design language. It's only when you turn the thing around and start using it that it really shows its age, and once again brings counterculture into the mix. While Samsung was doing its punch hole thing, which would eventually be the norm on pretty much every phone, and Google, Huawei and Apple were all playing around with different kinds of notches and cutouts, Google decided that they'd just stick a big old forehead on the thing. I mean, Google did receive a whole world of hate and trolling after the Pixel 3 XL's bathtub notch hole fiasco, so I guess they kind of felt pretty put back in their box to say that. but this still doesn't look ideal, especially when you realise that the Galaxy S10 and OnePlus 7 Pro came out the same year and look way better. The 4XL is a pretty big phone even by today's standards compared to my OnePlus 12. It's really not that far off in footprint. And yet, the 3700 mAh battery in this thing, well, it's just not up to stuff. I mean, if you tried hard enough, you could probably get a full day out of this thing today, but that radar system, it just drained everything like nobody's business. It had 18-watt wired charging, which was never really that fast when it came out either, especially when you compared it to OnePlus, Xiaomi and Huawei. It was not a good battery experience for a phone that genuinely was really big. This wasn't necessarily counterculture, and maybe more that Google was putting all of its eggs in the wrong basket. Google would go on to can Project Soli, the 2x telephoto, the forehead in the 4XL successor, and that phone has a whole other story, which is maybe worth another video, so let me know in the comments if you want to hear all about the Pixel 5. The 4 series though received generally favourable reviews on launch, even if no one was calling this the greatest device on the planet. Why? Because it was a pretty solid phone outside of its anomalies. The camera system was good, the 90Hz display was sharp and smooth for the time. The Snapdragon 855 and 6GB of RAM were, well, the highest end Snapdragon chips we would see in Pixels to date. There was IP68 water resistance, Google's phenomenal software which started at Android 10 and then topped up to Android 13. Sure, the face recognition had its detractors, but there was also a good chunk of people who wanted that sort of Face ID experience from iPhones on Android, and for better for worse, that's what the Pixel 4 and 4XL delivered. As much as I've sort of slated the 4XL's strange but also just straight deficient areas, I do miss these companies going out and trying something new, being brave and able to explore new technologies. It's how we ended up with big cameras on the backs of our phones, high refresh rate displays, punch hole cameras, in-display fingerprint readers, wireless charging, alert sliders. Just some of the more useful and innovative features we have today were only ever given the opportunity to mature because some executive greenlit the first implementation. And that's why, despite the Pixel 4's many weaknesses, it will go down as Google's counterculture flagship, the one that dared to be different. And I respect that.